The gaslight in Silas's telegraph office always seemed to fight a losing battle with the dust motes dancing in the air. Each evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, Silas would light the sputtering lamp, casting long, wavering shadows across the room. His hands, gnarled and spotted with age, moved with a practiced rhythm over the brass keys of the telegraph machine. Click-clack went the sounder, a language only a few understood. It was a constant, comforting song in the otherwise quiet town of Redemption Gulch. Silas wasn't just old. He was a relic, like the worn wooden desk he sat behind. His spectacles often slid down his nose, giving him a perpetually thoughtful look as he deciphered the urgent messages of the outside world. He'd been a telegrapher for longer than most folks in town had been alive, sending news of gold strikes, train arrivals, and sometimes heartbreaking losses. The room smelled of old paper, a hint of stale coffee, and the faint metallic tang of the telegraph equipment. Outside, the sounds of horses' hooves and distant saloon pianos drifted in, but inside, it was just Silas and the endless chatter of the wires. He'd often sigh, a soft, weary sound, as he tapped out another message, his fingers knowing the code better than his mind sometimes knew his own thoughts. The clicking was his life's pulse, a steady, unwavering beat in the heart of the western frontier. Silas was not alone in his appreciation for the telegraph song. Often, when he looked up from his keys, he'd see his small shadow lingering outside his window. It was a boy no older than 10, with wide, curious eyes. His clothes were patched and worn, and he moved with a quietness that suggested he was used to going unnoticed. This was Thomas. He lived on the streets, finding shelter where he could, and food often from the kindness of strangers or by helping out here and there. Thomas couldn't speak very well. Words tangled in his throat, coming out as a jumble of sounds or sometimes not at all. Because of this, most people ignored him or hurried past, uncomfortable with his silence. But Silas's office was different. From the dusty street, Thomas could hear the rhythmic click-clack of the telegraph key. It was a clear sound, a perfect sound, unlike the messy sounds that came from his own mouth. He would stand for what felt like hours, listening to the machine, trying to make sense of its steady beat. It was like a secret language, one that didn't need a voice to be understood. He found himself drawn to the window almost every day, especially in the late afternoon. The gaslight would flicker on inside, making the old office glow like a warm, inviting beacon. He couldn't understand the words the clicks made, but he felt the rhythm, the pauses, the quick bursts of sound. It was like music, a story told in taps and silence. He would sometimes tap his own fingers against a wooden post, trying to copy the patterns, imagining what important news the sounds carried across the vast western lands. The telegraph's voice was strong and clear, everything his own voice was not. One chilly afternoon, as Thomas stood outside, fingers tapping a silent rhythm on the wooden window frame, Silas looked up. He'd seen the boy before, a shadow against the dimming light, a silent listener. Loneliness was an old companion to Silas, a quiet hum beneath the telegraph's clicks. He watched Thomas's focused gaze, the way the boy's head tilted, as if trying to catch every faint sound. A thought sparked in Silas's mind. He slowly rose from his chair, his joints protesting with a soft creak. He walked to the door, pulled it open, and the sudden rush of cool air startled Thomas. The boy looked up, his eyes wide and uncertain, ready to bolt. "Boy," Silas's voice was rough but kind, like worn leather. "You listening to the sounds?" Thomas just stared, then nodded a small, quick nod. Silas gave a small smile, a rare sight on his tired face. "Come in. Don't stand out there in the cold." He stepped aside, gesturing with a hand that still held the faint smell of copper. Hesitantly, Thomas stepped inside the warm, gaslit office. The clicks of the telegraph were much louder in here, filling the air with their sharp, clear messages. Silas went back to his desk. "Those clicks," he said, tapping a finger near the sounder, "they're words. A secret language. Every tap, every pause, means something." He began slowly, tapping out a simple dash. "Ken, dusk, dot, Do it. He didn't ask Thomas to speak, just to listen. See, he'd say, it's like making a picture with sounds. You hear the long ones, the short ones. They tell a story. Thomas leaned closer, his eyes fixed on Silas's hands, on the keys, on the wondrous machine that made perfect sense. He began to hear the shapes of words, even if his own mouth couldn't form them. Learning the code wasn't easy. Thomas's fingers, used to the quick movements of a street boy, fumbled on the telegraph key. His attempts to tap out simple letters often came out as a jumble of dots and dashes, like a bird trying to sing for the first time. Silas never grew impatient. He would gently take Thomas's small hand, guiding it over the key, making sure each press was clear, each pause just right. Every sound has its place, Thomas, he'd murmur, his voice as steady as the ticking clock on the wall. Like notes in a song. Silas didn't just teach the clicks. He taught the cadence, the rise and fall of the sounds. He'd tap out a word, then say, hear that? Water has two parts, two strong sounds, just like when you speak. He'd encourage Thomas to try making sounds with his own voice, not pushing for words, but for the basic building blocks. He'd demonstrate a deep ah sound, then a short h sound. Thomas would try to copy, often producing only a small, raspy noise. But Silas would nod, a small encouragement, seeing the effort. Your voice is like a telegraph key, too, Silas would explain, pointing from the key to Thomas's throat. It makes sounds, some long, some short. When you put them together just right, they make words. It's all about the rhythm, the music of it. He would tap out a simple tune on the key, then hum it, showing how the short clicks were quick notes, the long dashes were drawn-out ones. Thomas, fascinated, would try to hum along, finding a new way to express himself through the simple, clear sounds. The office became a quiet school of sound, where the clicks of the telegraph began to unlock the boy's own voice, one patient lesson at a time. Years folded into each other like old letters. The dusty, gas-lit office remained, but the figures within it had changed. Thomas was no longer a small, silent boy peering through the window. He was a young man now, his frame taller, his shoulders broader, though he still carried a quietness about him. The sounds of the telegraph office, once a mystery, were now as familiar as his own heartbeat. He could understand the intricate dance of dots and dashes, translating the rapid-fire messages with an ease that often surprised even Silas. Complex financial reports, urgent warnings from distant towns, or simple greetings. Thomas could read them all, not just with his eyes, but with his ears, feeling the cadence of each word. And he could speak. The words didn't always flow perfectly. Sometimes, especially when he was nervous or excited, a slight stutter would catch in his throat, a faint echo of the boy he once was. But he could form sentences, express thoughts, and engage in conversations, thanks to Silas's patient lessons in the music of language. He often helped Silas with the incoming and outgoing messages, his own hands now moving with practiced grace over the keys, adding his rhythm to the office's symphony of clicks. The old telegrapher, his hair now even whiter, watched Thomas with a quiet pride. The office, once a solitary place, now held the comfortable presence of two men, bound by the shared language of the wires. The smell of old paper and copper remained, but mixed now with the scent of fresh ink and the quiet hum of shared understanding. The gaslight still sputtered, but its light seemed brighter, chasing away more shadows than before. For Thomas, the constant click-clack of the telegraph was no longer just a sound. It was a connection, a comfort, a reminder of how silence could be filled with meaning. The comfortable rhythm of the telegraph office was suddenly broken by a harsh, discordant note. Whispers, then shouts, began to fill the streets of Redemption Gulch. The mayor, a man named Bartholomew Bart Blackwood, who had always seemed so grand and important, was now at the center of a brewing storm. People were saying he had taken money that wasn't his, money meant for the town's new well, and used it for his own greedy pockets. The trouble hit hardest for families like the O'Malleys. Patrick O'Malley, a quiet farmer who had lived on his land for generations, was suddenly told he had to leave. The mayor claimed the O'Malley farm was needed for a new town improvement, but everyone knew it was because Patrick had spoken out against Blackwood's shady dealings. The O'Malleys were a good, honest family, with 3 young children, and the thought of them being thrown off their land sent a chill through the town. Silas and Thomas heard the talk, of course. The telegraph wires often carried hints of bigger troubles brewing, but this was different. This was happening right outside their door. Silas would cluck his tongue, his face grim. "A man's home is his castle," he'd mutter, thinking of the O'Malleys. Thomas, usually calm, felt a knot of worry tighten in his stomach. He remembered seeing the O'Malley children playing in the dusty street, their laughter bright. To imagine them without a home, cast out because of one man's greed, felt terribly wrong. The steady click-clack of the telegraph suddenly seemed less comforting, as if even the wires were humming with the town's unease. The usual sounds of Redemption Gulch, the blacksmith's hammer, the saloon's piano, were now mixed with a new, unsettling sound, the rising tide of fear and anger. Silas's old eyes had seen a lot of injustice over the years, but this felt different. He knew in his bones that Mayor Blackwood was crooked. The faint, metallic sounds of the telegraph wires hummed with more than just public messages. Sometimes, late at night, when the town was asleep, Silas would receive coded dispatches meant for the mayor himself. He'd heard snippets, quick bursts of dots and dashes that spoke of transactions and favors that didn't sound right. He'd ignored them mostly, chalking it up to the messy dealings of powerful men. But now, with the O'Malleys facing ruin, those sounds took on a sharper, uglier meaning. He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Thomas," he said one quiet evening, his voice barely a whisper above the telegraph's soft clicks. "There's more to this than what they're saying. I've heard things. Not official messages, mind you, but whispers. Secret taps between Blackwood and some powerful men in the city." Thomas leaned in, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by a keen interest. "They're talking about money, Thomas," Silas continued, his gaze distant. "Big money. And how Blackwood made sure some bids for the well project went to his friends, not the honest builders. They use code, but I know their rhythm. Greenbacks for the well, silence for the rest. That's what I heard, clear as a bell." Silas ran a tired hand over his face. "I'm too old for this fight, son. My fighting days are long past. But someone needs to know. Someone needs to speak up. These wires, they carry truth, but only if someone's willing to listen and then willing to tell." His eyes, usually clouded with age, held a flicker of hope as he looked at Thomas, the young man who had learned to listen so well. The day of the hearing dawned under a sky as gray and heavy as the mood in Redemption Gulch. The town's small courtroom, usually reserved for minor disputes, was packed. Every bench groaned and creaked under the weight of anxious townsfolk, their whispers a low hum that filled the air. Silas, looking even frilier than usual, sat in the front row, his gaze fixed on the judge's bench. Thomas sat beside him, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, the familiar comfort of the telegraph's clicks replaced by the unsettling murmur of the crowd. The gaslights, lit early against the dim morning light, flickered nervously, casting dancing shadows on the high walls. Their yellow glow struggled to chase away the gloom, making faces look drawn and worried. Mayor Bartholomew Blackwood entered, not through a side door like an accused man, but through the main entrance, his chest puffed out, a smug smile playing on his lips. He wore a fine, dark suit, and his boots clicked loudly on the wooden floor. He looked every bit the powerful, untouchable leader, his presence filling the room, making it feel smaller, colder. He sat at his table, surrounded by stern-faced men in sharp clothes, and looked out at the townsfolk with an air of arrogant confidence. The judge, a serious man with a thick beard, called the court to order. The creaking benches, the nervous coughs, the distant sounds of the town outside, all faded as the proceedings began. The O'Malley family sat together, their faces pale with worry, their fate hanging in the balance. The air was thick with tension, each breath taken a small, careful sound. Thomas felt the weight of Silas's quiet hope and the heavy truth he now carried. waiting for his moment. Thomas O'Connell to the stand. The clerk's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the courtroom's hushed air. Thomas's heart leaped into his throat, beating like a frantic drum. He felt every eye in the room turn to him, 100 pairs of eyes, all waiting. His legs felt like jelly as he slowly rose, the creak of the bench beneath him echoing in the sudden silence. He saw Mayor Blackwood's sneering face, a challenge in his eyes. As Thomas walked towards the witness stand, a wave of fear washed over him. His mouth felt dry, and he could feel the familiar tightening in his chest, the one that always made words catch and stumble. He thought of all the times he had tried to speak as a boy, only to have sounds jumble, making people turn away. What happened now when it mattered most? His stutter, a ghost from his past, seemed to rise up, threatening to choke his voice completely. But then, as he reached the stand, he saw Silas. The old man gave him a small, encouraging nod. And in that moment, Thomas remembered. He remembered the countless hours in the dusty office, the clear, precise clicks of the telegraph key. Dort dusk, dort. Each sound distinct, each pause meaningful. Silas's patient voice, explaining the music of language, how every sound, every syllable had its place. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being clear, about making each part count. He closed his eyes for a split second, taking a deep breath, and pictured the telegraph key sending its message one deliberate sound at a time. The courtroom faded, replaced by the rhythmic precision of Morse code. Thomas opened his eyes, a new resolve shining in them. He looked at the judge, then at Mayor Blackwood, who now looked less smug, a flicker of worry crossing his face. Thomas took a deep breath, focusing on the rhythm of his own voice, much like he would focus on the clicks and pauses of a telegraph message. He began to speak, slowly at first, each word carefully chosen, each sound deliberate. "Your Honor," he started, his voice surprisingly clear, though a slight tremor still ran through it. I know about the mayor's dealings, not from gossip, but from the wires, from the telegraph messages." A murmur went through the courtroom. Mayor Blackwood shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing. Thomas continued, gaining confidence with each word, his earlier stutter almost entirely absent. "Silas, my teacher, he taught me to listen, to hear the rhythm of words, even when they're hidden. I've heard messages sent late at night, in a code I learned to understand." He spoke of Project Phoenix, the mayor's secret name for the Wells scheme. He recited phrases Silas had overheard, like securing the bid, no questions asked, and O'Malley's land, a small price for a big gain. He explained how the mayor had conspired to funnel money from the Well project into his own pockets, by making sure only his friends' companies got the work. He spoke about the O'Malley family, not with anger, but with a quiet, firm voice that held the weight of truth. He explained how their farm was targeted because Patrick O'Malley had dared to question the mayor's plans. The gaslights flickered, casting a dramatic glow on his face, highlighting his earnestness. Every word was a click, every sentence a clear message, exposing the mayor's lies, one undeniable truth after another. The room was silent, captivated by the young man who had found his voice in the service of justice. A stunned silence hung in the air after Thomas finished speaking. The gaslights continued their nervous dance, but the only sound was the collective intake of breath from the assembled townsfolk. Mayor Blackwood's face, once confident, was now a mask of disbelief and anger. He spluttered, trying to interrupt, but the judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack, silencing him. The judge, his brow furrowed, looked from Thomas to the mayor, then back to Thomas. He asked a few more questions, confirming the details, and each time, Thomas answered with a quiet strength that belied his nervous beginning. His words, once trapped and tangled, now flowed with an undeniable clarity, carrying the weight of truth. The testimony, once thought impossible from the quiet boy who could barely speak, was a powerful, unexpected blow. The O'Malley family, who had listened with growing hope, now openly wept with relief. Patrick O'Malley stood, his voice thick with emotion, thanking Thomas, his family safe, their home secure. A ripple of murmurs began to spread through the courtroom. Not whispers of fear, but of dawning understanding and, finally, relief. It started as a soft hum, then grew louder, a collective sigh, a release of tension that had gripped the town for weeks. The judge, after a short deliberation, delivered his verdict. Mayor Blackwood was found guilty of corruption. The O'Malleys would keep their farm. The sound of relief in the courtroom was almost deafening. Cheers, happy cries, the creak of people shifting, no longer burdened by fear. Silas, his eyes shining with pride, reached out and gently squeezed Thomas's hand. The clear, precise sound of truth, once just clicks on a wire, had now echoed through the courtroom, saving a family and clearing the air in Redemption Gulch. In the days that followed, Redemption Gulch felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Mayor Blackwood was gone, and a new, honest leader was chosen. The O'Malleys stayed on their farm, their children's laughter once again echoing freely. And Thomas, the quiet boy who could barely speak, was now a respected figure in town. People would nod to him on the street, offering words of thanks. He still worked with Silas in the telegraph office, the familiar click-clack of the keys filling their days. Silas, his old eyes twinkling, often watched Thomas with a profound sense of peace. The young man now handled much of the telegraph traffic, his fingers dancing over the keys with an expert touch. The slight stutter still surfaced sometimes, a gentle reminder of his past, but it no longer held him back. He spoke clearly, confidently, his voice a steady, reliable sound. The gaslights in the office still flickered, and the dust motes still danced, but the atmosphere had changed. The clicks of the telegraph were no longer just a means of sending messages. They were a living testament. They spoke of the old telegrapher's patience, the countless hours spent teaching not just a code, but the very rhythm of communication. They spoke of a boy's quiet courage, learning to shape sounds into meaning. And most importantly, they spoke of truth, how a hidden message, once brought to light by a clear voice, could change lives and bring justice. The telegraph keys continued their endless conversation with the world, a constant reminder that even the smallest sound, when guided by patience and truth, could create the loudest,